Hello, Fab World. Welcome to day three of the Fab Symposium within FABxLive, which is co-hosted by the Fab Foundation and MIT Center Bits and Atoms. On day one, Neil Gershenfeld got us started with a global response to COVID-19, including design, validation, distributed manufacturing. Day two, Sherry continued the conversation with community action and building community. This session will be on rebooting economy, and tomorrow Tomas will be discussing emergent futures and building a future. It's always kind of both energizing and humbling to follow Neil and Sherry, but I'm joined this morning by a wonderful group to continue the arc of the discussion into rebooting economies, specifically in the context of building back better. So as we all know, we have a need to reboot from an interrelated set of breakdowns in public health, economic disruption, and especially in the United States, social justice crises. Our speakers and panelists have been researching, designing, prototyping, etc. What better should include, and perhaps what an economy empowered by something like Fab Network could look like and how it could behave. As a note, on the social justice side, I look forward to a session this afternoon on diversity and inclusion. Is your lab ready to be an inclusive space? That's at 1 Boston time with the Fab Foundation's own Sherry Lassiter and Jean-Luc. So for this session, just to set the stage a bit, we're discussing a notion of better that centers around core desired outcomes from economic activities, such as personal and family wellness, community resilience, planetary wellness, not just teetering at the boundaries of the brink of collapse and catastrophe, but in a state of kind of health and regeneration, and collective social and political wellness. It's also looking at the creation of health and wellness as being the norm for the human condition, not the exception, while of course operating within that realm of realities of local, regional, and planetary systems. Everybody's familiar with donut economics, which has provided us a great tool for kind of clarifying how to talk about that target state. I wanted to kind of refer the conversation today a couple times to kind of the 3 horizons model of innovation that provides kind of interesting framework, I think, for our conversation and discussion, and how we look at the approach to building back with embedded values that the network has shown that it's interested in over a period of time in terms of what better means. In that framework, there are kind of 3 aspects, 3 categories of innovation. One is kind of sustaining innovation, which continues and sustains the existing pattern of activity. The other is disruptive innovation, which we talk about a lot in terms of disrupting the status quo. And then the third is transformative innovation, which shifts from one status quo to another. If we're aiming for the norm to be, regenerative planetary health, and for it to be the exception that a person is not able to meet their needs and grow to be able to contribute the best of themselves to society, then we're definitely talking about transformative innovation. As we currently have breakdowns in the normal way of operating, both caused by and illuminated by the pandemic, there's a great effort by existing structures to get back to quote unquote normal through sustaining innovations and also through pulling in those kind of disruptive innovations into the same framework to kind of continue with the current pattern of activity. Over the last 2 days, we've seen extraordinary accomplishments discussed, incorporating rapid development, validation, and distributed delivery of physical goods, and also rapid coordinated activity through local and distributed communities within this kind of extraordinary network. And I look forward to discussing how those tools can provide for rapid change of the transformative type as we're talking about economic rebooting. To that end, again, I'm very fortunate to be in the virtual presence of 4 individuals who are both researchers and practitioners this morning. They'll give individual talks and will also join in a collective panel discussion at the end. We'll have a brief interview with each speaker after their talk, in addition to the panel discussion and Q&A. So please use the YouTube comments to post your questions, and we'll try to pull those out and incorporate those in both the interviews and the panel discussion. So with that, I'm really happy and honored to pull up the first speaker, who's Juliet Schor, and could do a half-hour introduction on any of these folks. So I'll hit the highlight pieces, but please feel free to follow on, and I'm going to introduce the speakers, not their topics. Um, so she's a professor of sociology at Boston College. Her most recent book is After the Gig, How the Sharing Economy Got Hijacked and How to Win It Back, which I believe is out next month or in September. Current research topics include gig economy, future of work, use of time, and drivers of environmental constraints, carbon emissions. She's also the chair of the board of directors of the Better Future Project, which is a Massachusetts-based climate activist organization. With that, I will be quiet and hand you off to Juliet.
Wonderful. So thank you so much, Blair. It's a great privilege and a pleasure to be here. I met Blair 10 years ago when I published a book called Plenitude, The New Economics of True Wealth. And that's been really a privilege. He's one of the most creative and innovative people I've met in this world. So thank you, Blair, for reaching out. When I was writing that Plenitude book, I had read Neil Gershenfeld's book, and I was really excited by the Fab Lab concept, and I incorporated it into my vision. And since then, I've had the opportunity to study makerspace and the maker movement and cooperatives. We're going to hear more about the wonderful Cooperation Jackson movement. Yeah, I mean, this range of issues is really important and very near to my heart. So 10 years ago, when I wrote Plenitude, which was my vision for a high quality of life, ecologically sustainable, and economically efficient economy, it was 2008. We had just had the financial crash. It was the George W. Bush era. And there was little hope of any serious government role to play in solving any of the problems that we were facing. In fact, the government was pretty active in exacerbating the problems we were facing. So the book focused on what individual households and communities can do. It had a very sort of small scale orientation. Now here we are in 2020, and we're finally talking about a larger sort of systemic change, which I find really exciting. And I think we have the opportunity now to expand the vision from all the amazing work that's been done over the last 10 years at the local level to now start talking about scaling up, building back better, and rebooting. So that's really exciting, and I'm very happy to be here taking part in this conversation. So let me begin by just talking about the moment we're in. And I would say we are in a moment in which capitalism, our economic system, is being questioned to an extent that I think is really pretty unusual, particularly over the last 30 to 40 years. We've got Extinction Rebellion here. We can't eat money, talking about ecocide, the failures of austerity, and the idea that the only sustainable way forward is with a big change in how we think about the purpose of our economy. And this is really a global phenomenon, moving beyond business as usual capitalism, which is clearly a failing system. And I think in sort of keeping with some of the big themes in the technology movement today, what's really clear is that we've got to change the social and economic technologies of our time to keep up with the very rapid advances in classical technology. So that's what I want to talk about now. What are some of those new, or some of them are actually quite old, but what are the social and economic technologies that we need to put in place to go with the advanced technology, digital technology, and so forth, to really solve the problems of our moment. So the first, I want to start with 3 principles that need to underlie any reboot or any new vision of a system. And the first one, really brought home in the United States in recent weeks by George Floyd's murder, the protests that have taken place since then, is the right to bodily integrity, to basic security, and to self-determination. And I have here on this slide just a remembrance that 25 years ago, we had a fatal, a really horrible heat wave in Chicago, the worst in the city's history, in which a large number of people died. And the theme of the sort of explanation for who died in that heat wave was that it was people who, first of all, were socially isolated. The group most likely to die was Black men living in single occupancy, rooming houses in high crime neighborhoods, who had lost connections with their families, and their housing was substandard. So they stayed inside rooms that became fatally hot. And what this shows is the interconnection of racism, poverty, social disconnection, disintegration, and climate emergency. So the problems that we have today are very much linked, and we need a holistic solution to address them. So that's principle 1. And connected with that, I'll just put the 4th one here because it's the closest, is the idea that in order to get quality of life, which is something Blair mentioned, people not only need to be free from those threats that I just talked about, police violence, racism, poverty, etc., but they also need to have the ability, the freedom to lead a self-determined life. And I've got a community garden here, which is a symbol for a healthy life, a healthy environment, healthy food, health care, but also a healthy system. And I want to talk today about what I've called the work and spend system. The trouble with being in the rat race is that even if you win, you're still a rat. So the system itself has a kind of sickness built into it. Second principle is extreme inequality. And this is a feature of our economy today that's one of the most pernicious dimensions of it. 3 men, Buffett, Gates, and Bezos in the United States, have as much wealth as the bottom 50% of our population. I mean, that's an extraordinary statistic. And in part, it's because the bottom 40%, who you can see here in the first column, the bottom 40% of the US population has zero wealth, either none or is in debt, in comparison to the top 1/10 of 1%, with 100 million average household wealth. So very extreme inequality, which of course has a very strong racial dimension to it. And here you can see the differences between median wealth in the United States by race. Between 1983 and 2016, whites have had a quite substantial increase in their median wealth. Now, median wealth is about 150,000, but Blacks and Latinos have, virtually no wealth, meaning total assets minus liabilities. So this is one of the really important structural features that of the economic landscape, which have arisen as a result of the systemic racism that we've been talking about quite a bit in our country in recent weeks. It's also this phenomenon on a global scale. Oxfam has been charting how many people have as much money, wealth as the bottom 50% of the global population. And at the last count, it was a mere 62 people have, what more than 3 billion people have. So extreme inequality, both within countries and globally. Third, I just want to say any solution, any reboot, building back better has to put the climate emergency at its core. We're in the middle of a heat wave here in Boston. You can see the rapid increase in temperatures, which is escalating by the year. And we are getting into a world in which significant portions of the globe are going to be uninhabitable for humans before too long, and we really haven't begun to address this. Of course, it's creating enormous havoc, disasters, and bodily insecurities all over the world. This is the cyclone Idai in Madagascar, which leveled whole parts of the country. The Camp Fire in Paradise, California, the worst in history, my own city, and drought all over the world. So massive climate impacts. And of course, the responsibility for the carbon emissions in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases are disproportionately disproportionately the responsibility of wealthy countries of the global north, and the impacts disproportionately going to the global south. So that's really got to be key. So those are the problems. Those are the principles that we need to underlie a new model. I've called it the plenitude model, and let me now just get into what I mean by that. So the first, and really in some ways the core of the plenitude model, is that we need to do what we might call power down. So move out of long hours and conventional work that would power down energy demand, get out of that work and spend cycle that I talked about. This is a historical graph, and I have it here because I want to show us all, remind us that for the 100 years from 1870 to 1973, I have 6 countries here, but all of them, these are the 6 so-called advanced industrial countries, early industrializers. All of these countries had significant reductions in working hours, and they did that by taking productivity growth and channeling it into less time. So they didn't take all the productivity growth and expand the economy with it. They took a significant fraction of it and used it to move people out of long working hours. In 1870, the average work week was about 60 hours a week. By 1973, it's under 40. But let's take a look at what's happened since 1973. So a number of countries have continued to reduce their working hours, but you can see the light blue line, the US or the UK line. These are countries that basically sort of stalled out on hours reductions, and continue and sort of began moving in another direction, in a direction in which productivity growth was used to expand output. And in fact, what we see since 2012 is a divergence in what was a common path. The UK, the Netherlands, the United States have actually begun increasing their working hours since 2012, whereas Germany, France, Japan have continued on that pathway. And that pathway to reduced hours is really key for achieving a number of the things that I talked about in those early principles. So why is it? What happened? In a book I wrote in 1992, The Overworked American, I talked about the work and spend cycle in which employers demand long hours, people have to work those hours to get the jobs, they then get locked into spending patterns associated with that income, and the cycle repeats over and over again. Since 92, in fact, the incomes have stagnated, inequality's gone up, so the cycle has actually gotten worse, but the working part of it has continued, and the spending part in the United States and in some other countries has been paired with taking on debt in order to increase, maintain the spending, and so that's become an even more dysfunctional part of it. It's a big part of what's impairing quality of life for people who do have jobs, and of course, quality of life is impaired on the other side of this, which is the flip side of overwork, and that's underwork, underemployment, people who don't have enough work and therefore don't have enough income. So another key part of this, the puzzle of working hours or the problem of excessive working hours, is that they are a key dimension of climate, a driver of climate emissions and of sort of climate degradation. And what I have here in this graph, in the green area on the bottom, zone 3, absolute decoupling, shows countries that have been able to actually reduce their climate emissions. And there are only a couple of them. Russia did it because they collapsed early on. France, Germany, low rates of GDP growth were necessary in order to get that reductions in emissions. And none of the other countries above the horizontal axis have been able to actually reduce emissions during this period. And I've done a lot of research looking at this, and sort of two points come out of that work, two main points. One is that countries with longer average working hours on an annual basis have higher carbon emissions, controlling for the other determinants of carbon emissions. This is also true, by the way, across US states, which we've looked at. And countries that are more unequal and have more of that, what I called extreme inequality earlier, which is in concentrated wealth and income at the top of the distribution. So whether we're looking at the top 10%, 5%, or 1%, countries that are more unequal in distribution of income and wealth also have higher carbon emissions, other things equal. And when you put those two things together, they actually intensify the effect. So more inequality makes the working hours effect stronger. So shorter hours are really key for solving our climate problem. Now we can ask if shorter work time is affordable, and that's a great question. Some of the issues around this have to do with aging populations, particularly in Europe, Japan. I think the solution to that is going to have to be climate migration. More and more people are leaving their homes, are increasingly going to have to leave their homes. So we're going to have to solve the tensions around immigration in wealthy countries. Wealthy countries are going to have to take many more people. And for places like Europe, Japan, which are facing labor shortages, that actually should be a good thing. I want to raise one other point here. Apologies for the crude language, it's not mine, but David Graeber wrote this book about quote unquote bullshit jobs. I wouldn't use that language, but the point that he was making is an important one, which is that there are many jobs in our economy which are unnecessary. Some of them we've been discussing in the United States, policing, many more police than we need. Advertising in our healthcare system, maybe 20% of the employment is paper pushing. So when you have an unfair system, you've got to employ many more people to keep it operating, because that unfairness generates resistance. If you have a fair system, you can actually have a much more efficient system. You can sort of eliminate a lot of jobs. And of course, we have artificial intelligence, robotization, and so forth, increasingly coming in, which will also be able to eliminate a lot of jobs. So I think the question isn't, is shorter work time affordable? It's how can we not respond to these, the technological challenges without shorter work time? One of the things we know is that historically, technological innovation has been accompanied by shorter working hours. We saw that in that 100-year graph, and that's one of the main ways that economies have been able to absorb technological unemployment. So I think the answer to that is yes, shorter work time is affordable. We can talk more about that in the Q&A. So let me just run quickly through the last couple of parts of the plenitude model. As I said, shorter work time is key. And I envision it happening in two ways. One is that conventional employers reduce their hours of work. I also got interested in the gig economy as a way of giving people more control over their work time and allowing them to work shorter hours, something that many people want to do, particularly those with higher incomes. But I also explored the idea of self-provisioning or community provisioning, using the philosopher Fritjof Bergman's terminology, high-tech self-provisioning. You'll see here are two pictures of fabrication labs, but also a permaculture garden, a straw bale house, people generating their own wind energy. So the idea here is do it yourself, do it together, reduce the scale, produce at that low scale, both in manufacturing and in agriculture. And that, I think, is this whole nexus of ideas and practices, I think, are quite familiar to folks in the Fab Lab community. But if you're going to work less, it also means that over time your income isn't going to be rising. You may be actually reducing income in order to get that, reclaim that time, which I studied many people who were doing that. And so the adjustment to shorter hours also needs to be accompanied by a new kind of consumer regime, a new lifestyle. And so I began studying low-cost consuming and sustainable lifestyles and the whole quote-unquote sharing revolution that started at with the Great Recession. Not only the big corporate players that we've heard about, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, not really what I would call sharing, but the real sharing that is going on in economies and societies across the globe, whether it's sharing of food, bike sharing, fastest growing form of transportation, clothing swaps, repair cafes, time banks, which are where people trade services for time. And I include here also a tool library, which long predated the financial collapse of 2008. Tool libraries became popular in African American communities decades ago, where you had a lot of desire for home renovation, home construction and building, but low incomes prevented everyone from buying their own tools. So tool libraries became an important community resource. So there's a lot that can be done on the spending side to reduce people's need for incomes, which is also ecological, reduces footprints, and builds community. But it's not enough to just focus on self-provisioning and shorter hours of work and lower cost consuming. We also, to make this work, you also need to do more provisioning for basic needs. And in my vision, that happens largely at the municipal level, in which local cities and towns provide that basic security that I talked about as that first principle, giving people access at low cost or free, depending on what we're talking about, to basic needs. And I have here 3 examples of basic needs. One is energy and the idea of a municipal utility that provides low cost energy, which is controlled by the community. The picture of people eating at tables is from a city in Brazil, Belo Horizonte, which initiated a massive sort of food security program and offered food security to all of its residents and various kinds of public transportation. So the more that municipalities do to provide basic needs to people, the less they need to work to earn money and get into that work and spend cycle. Last point here is we also need to scale this up, and to really build it back better, we need government policy to make this possible. Of course, we need healthcare. Federal or national governments need to provide aid to cities, states, and towns to mitigate inequality, and we also need to do that on a global level. And a big part of that money is going to have to come from wealth taxation. Universal basic income is an important thing we need to start talking more about and start implementing. Of course, a Green New Deal. And let me just end by saying that to move from what many have called the growth imperative of that austerity economy that we've been living with for the last decades, we need a social movement. It's not going to happen without, it's going to happen in part because people start doing it, but we also need that policy change, and that will only happen if people start demanding it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. On several levels, appreciate the framing of what some of the goals would be and kind of delineation of the interdependence of what's necessary to simultaneously happen to achieve many of these. Before I get into my questions, there are a couple questions that came up um, through the YouTube chat. One was from Sarah Bosberg. How do we shift mindset? So many people in the US don't even take their vacation time today. Um, so, from the perspective of kind of adaptation of personal worldview, mindset, kind of shifting behavior, how is that kind of catalyzed? Have you seen any examples at a local level of that mind shift happening?
Yeah. So I think that when I think about mindset, I think first of practice, because my view is that as people begin to do things differently, their mindset changes. And then you have that sort of social diffusion model in which people seeing others living differently, it leads them to do things differently. So we have some examples of this happening at the sort of government and corporate level. So there have been a number of 4-day work week sort of experiments or interventions in Nordic countries that have been very successful. Um, Microsoft Japan went to a 4-day work week and had big increases in productivity and a lot of publicity about it. But I think that it's going to come less from the corporate sector than from the bottom up. And so as more people find themselves either unable to get jobs in the corporate sector or not desiring that, as we have now, massive unemployment problems around the globe. Um, if we don't think, if we try and avoid the view that what we need to do is go back to the old system, go back to the long full-time work, etc., and instead start to think more creatively about other ways for people to work and get income, that is going to help change the mindset. And so in particular, I'm thinking about um, basic incomes, healthcare provided, etc. The more that people have their basic needs met in a collective way, the freer they are to self-determine their work lives. And I think when people can do that, they're not going to want those long hour corporate jobs. I mean, yes, there'll be some people who want to do that, but increasing numbers of people, I think, would like to be their own boss. That's one of the reasons the gig economy was so popular, particularly in the early days. And this is a place where I think the adverse economic trends on employment may actually help to change first what people do and then how they think about it.
Okay, and that leads into the other question, which has to do with the interrelationship between shorter times and less work and unemployment. And that can be counterintuitive to some folks. The question specifically was how to manage shorter times, less work, but still control unemployment rates that will have a negative impact in the society.
Yeah, well, actually, shorter hours are a really key policy tool for keeping unemployment lower because there's not an unlimited amount of work at any time, particularly for an individual economy or an individual country. And one of the ways we see this is in the way particularly Northern European economies have responded historically to downturns and recessions. So the so-called Great Recession of 2008, in Europe, many companies reduced working hours rather than lay people off. In the United States, our companies laid people off instead of quote unquote shared work. And if we believe in an ethic of sharing, which I deeply do, and I think we're going to hear more about sharing from our representatives here from Jackson Cooperation, because what is Cooperation Jackson? Excuse me. What is cooperation if not sharing? Then if we believe in sharing, we should be sharing work. So long work hours, one side of high working hours is that it concentrates work in the hands of a smaller number of people, and it creates more unemployment and underemployment. I mean, when I was studying trends in work time from the 1970s onward, one of the things I found was growing underemployment and unemployment as average work hours rise. So I think that that's really the most important connection there, which is that if hours of work rise, companies need fewer employees, and that creates more unemployment.
Okay, that I'm going to interject one more question, but that was a perfect segue into the Cooperation Jackson, who's up next. But before we get there, let me ask you one thing. You kind of mentioned early on about government, the position of government interest and ability to help with this. And you mentioned 2008 when government was actively exacerbating the problem, which sounds a lot like 2020. And so, this network is highly motivated and highly skilled to not wait upon large scale responses, but to directly, coordinate locally, globally, in many different ways in order to make a change. How do you manage up from that perspective? How do you set the conditions by which governments will follow?
Yeah, it's a really great question. There's a whole field of study, mostly among engineers, and it tends to be based more in Europe and outside of the United States, called socio-technical transitions. And there are a couple of things we can learn from that field. And I think that the first one is that innovation happens first in niches, and then for the niche to really expand and scale up, it has to begin to intersect with the policy level. And so we have a lot of amazing niches, but the niches, the view of this field, and it's my view as well, is the niches will never just expand to scale up on their own. That's what I call it the naive aggregationist view, which is this sort of naive view that you just, it's like, be the change you want to see in the world. Everybody just does it and it magically happens. So niches can get to a certain point, and then to get successful, and these come from studies both of innovation technological innovation within industries, but also I think the whole field of political economy shows us that you need the policy environment to scale, and that the state, what we call the state or the government, is absolutely crucial in organizing, most areas of social life, whether we're talking about technology, energy, education, even family law, etc. So we grow to a certain size, and then we really have to start pushing up. And that's why I ended, even though I was out of time, I made sure to put that last slide in on the social movements, because it's the social movements that force the governments to change. And we will never see the kind of change from below that we're interested in becoming the dominant without basically having that influence on the state. And so right now, what we're facing is a state which is captured by elite interests, whether it's the fossil fuel interests or the finance or just the interests of the plutocrats, military interests, etc. All in states all over the world. In some places worse than others. In the United States right now, to a really seriously, dangerous and pernicious extent, our state is captured. You can see it in the negotiations that are going on over the next relief bill for the coronavirus. But that's the key thing, is to get to that next stage, is to begin to put that pressure. And it doesn't only come from the streets. It also comes from it comes from policy work, from our own think tanks, from our research, from showing that our models, and I'm sure we're going to hear about this from our next speakers, that our models actually work, they're more efficient, they're more ecological, they serve people's needs, and Blair, to the, one of the issues that you're so interested in, they create quality of life for people. And when you have a failing system like we do that is destroying people's quality of life, having those models that work, whether it's a Fab Lab or an agricultural cooperative, those are so key, because they give them the imagination and the vision to say, yes, another world is possible. The thing that Margaret Thatcher and neoliberals and all of those folks who sort of took over the economic system decades ago said wasn't possible.
Thank you very much. And actually, we ended up right on time, so it all worked out perfectly. So let's continue this pace going. So our next group is from Cooperation Jackson, headed up by Kali Akuno. And Kali served as the Director of Special Projects and External Funding in the mayoral administration of the late Chokwe Lumumba of Jackson, Mississippi. His focus was supporting cooperative development, sustainability, human rights, and international relations. He's an organizer, educator, writer for human rights and social justice. He's a former co-director of the U.S. Human Rights Network. He's also served as the executive director of the People's Hurricane Relief Fund, based in New Orleans, Louisiana, after Hurricane Katrina. Cooperation Jackson was Cooperation Jacksoning prior to Fab Lab involvement, but over the last few years have joined the network and incorporated Fab Labs and digital fabrication into their daily practice. So let me turn it over to you, Kali.
All right. Pleasure to be here. I'm going to switch up a few things. I'm going to surprise a bit my team. And this is just really in response to many of the things that Juliet just, I think, laid out, which I'm not going to say stole some of our thunder, but definitely incorporated a lot of similar ideas. So I really want to just take some things and expand on it. And I'm going to ask my two co-workers, Sabrina Howard and Kwame Braxton, who are with our community production cooperative, which is our emerging Fab Lab that Blair just spoke to. We're gonna do some innovation and some jazz work on here for folks today. So y'all just be ready to come on in when prompted. Now, reason being, I want to pick up on one thing that Juliet just really touched on. So I think folks both understand our context a little bit more, how we are thinking about this. And I think some of the things that our work, practice, and model are demonstrating are viable. There's still a long way to go for us to kind of reach the transformative potential that we're aiming for. But it's I'm going to start with something I think we realized within the second year of our existence. We come out of an organizing tradition and model that has been building and trying to do some transformative work in Mississippi and Jackson in particular for well over 50 years. Cooperation Jackson itself was kind of the thought project of a series of initiatives that kind of gathered steam right after September 11th, when one of the social movements on the ground kind of recognized we're going to have to make some strategic shifts politically in a number of different ways. But it wasn't until 2014 that Cooperation Jackson was officially born as a kind of an outgrowth or a project of the Jackson Kush plan, specifically to work on developing the solidarity economy component of that plan. Now, our first kind of thought and iteration was that we were more or less focused in on job creation. We were very much kind of unconsciously stuck in that orientation. And our work around cooperative development was really kind of aimed at creating the maximum number of jobs that we could in our community to meet the overwhelming community need for employment within the current framework and structure. Even though we thought we were kind of thinking out of the box, I think we kind of quickly realized that if every single one of our ideas and every single niche that we could fill in the local economy with cooperatives, that it would still be limited in the number of actual jobs that it could create, just given how we're kind of situated in the overall regional economy, global economy. And one of the things that we kind of quickly kind of realized is that in our community, I would say the objective need for employment is for about 75 to 80,000 jobs. Real unemployment, not the fake unemployment statistics that you get from how unemployment is kind of registered within the United States, but real unemployment or underemployment in Jackson, which is a city which is over 80% Black, just so everybody knows, is about 50%. You can knock on almost any door any time of day in Jackson, and you'll find an able-bodied, typically find an able-bodied adult who's idly not working or doing anything. So we had to shift in our thinking, from practice to kind of uncover some of our biases and shortcomings. And what we pivoted to was the main focus of our work is actually shifting or working to try to shift the quality of life, not to try to meet maximum employment. And that the solidarity economy framework is really kind of best suited in that regard when it's kind of scaled up to amplify sharing, cooperative work, and commenting on a broad level. And so that is where we've been really trying to shift up in the number of things. And instead of looking at folks kind of having quote unquote free time because they're underemployed or not employed, we have to turn that into, and trying to work and turn that into an asset and saying that what can people do to improve their quality of life and circulate value through their own productive activities, which is still the phase that we're at, by being involved in broader cooperative work or being involved in things like time banking, skill sharing, et cetera, to do the more transformative work. Because we exist in a context in Jackson where we actually have a very high level of skill in the community. Unlike many kind of urban communities, you still have tons of people here who know how to build a house from scratch, who know how to do plumbing, who know how to do electrical work, who know how to do farming, and these are all the same people. And so it's not a lack of skill, it's really just a lack of access and economic opportunity within the traditional framework. But our challenge is to transform that skill into productive activities that folks can do to create a vibrant kind of local sharing economy. So this also gets to the point that Juliet was saying around kind of what our kind of immediate scale and scope could be and should be. And then the piece that she also added on, I want to reinforce, that's been very central to us, is thinking about this within a broad climate justice ecological framework and trying to figure out what within our activities is building not only the future in terms of kind of the social justice, but building a future which is truly not only going to be sustainable, but regenerative. How do we regenerate the soils? The soil depletion is a major problem that we're facing all over the world in addition to climate change. How do we reduce all of the different emissions? And what are the role that we play in that? Localizing production is one of the central things that we do for that. And for us, we've made our anchors in that in food sovereignty work primarily, which we're trying to really localize the food productive system. We have many advantages here in Mississippi in order to do that many might not have, but even still, there are ways that we now know through hydroponic, aquaponic, permacultural practices that in almost any kind of environment with a combination of, I think, some of the skill and innovation that we're bringing in via the Fab practices and digital fabrication, that we can blend all of these things in if there's adequate skill and if there's adequate resource. So let me speak to that last challenge because it speaks to, in part, what we've been calling kind of the fabrication divide. And this mirrors, I think, one of the big challenges that we have, even though the Fab Labs have been growing exponentially the last 15 years, there's still some challenges around capital entry for a lot of communities, particularly some of the smaller communities that we work with and encounter here. You know, it's not like you have to have millions of dollars to do kind of like a Fab Academy, which makes the entry point for it, you know, low. But still, if you're dealing with a community like ours in Jackson, even $20,000, $30,000 level investment for many of the folks in our community seems almost impossible. So there's a aspect and a dimension of really struggling for a more democratic finance that we all have to take on as a movement, I think, in order for the Fab movement to really grow, thrive, and prosper, and to reach areas like Jackson, or to reach areas, you know, Biloxi, Natchez, you know, places, these places in Mississippi, again, where there's, and throughout the South and throughout many parts of the world, where there's adequate skill, where there's a definite movement in needs that are also being met on a local scale, that we can make some pivotal shifts, I think, at a critical time that will really enhance and do the transformative work from below that I think it will be necessary on a significant scale before we even get to that place where Juliet was mentioning about reaching the policy level. There's still some more grassroots kind of work, at least I think in our view, that we have to get at. The last piece I want to, for my part, get at, I see the clock is ticking on me, and just really kind of getting into kind of the heart of it. I want to just do a screen share just real quickly to highlight something that we've been.
We got a 5-minute Q&A after
Gotcha.
that you can feel free to push into. So
Got you. So I want to move just really to this particular screen. This is a piece that we have been putting out, building on our work, but just building on things that have already. Excuse me? Oh, I have to do, let me go back. Apologies, everybody. I forgot to do the screen share. Okay. And now the presentation within that. Okay. So this is a piece that we've been really trying to work on. I'll just try to speed up, and we'll making this more available. But in some of our work in response to the pandemic, folks have been really kind of asking us, how do they make some transition points, kind of seeing, I think, some of the things that we've been able to do in our work here in Jackson, which I'll ask just Kwame and Sabrina real briefly to speak on. And what this really points at, we're not going to have enough time to really get into it, but it's really kind of taking a number of different things that already exist and put them in dialogue with each other to scale up, as Juliet was mentioning. Just briefly, I want to touch on the first kind of four, which are mutual aid, food sovereignty, cooperative economics, and community production. The mutual aid work during the pandemic in the United States, and I think all over the world, really exploded. And we've seen mutual aid kind of networks and things develop, at least here in the United States, which I know best, scale up in March and April on a scale that we haven't really seen since the Great Depression. That was a critical piece that I think really illustrated the degree to which sharing as a principle and a value still exists within this culture, despite all of the work that neoliberalism has done to atomize us and to break social solidarity. That broad expression of it, I think, was pretty profoundly unique. And not only does it speak to kind of collective sharing, but I think it spoke primarily also to identifying need and then connecting that need with local productive capacities in a way that we haven't seen in quite some time. And that was particular linked work in the models that we've been looking at in our own practice of really linking that with local food production work or connecting with local food production work. So there were a lot of cases and examples throughout the South and the Midwest here in the United States where farmers were directly connecting with communities and mutual aid networks to do food distribution. These are things which could break some of the very dependent and exploitive kind of supply and value chains that exist and create new models. And if we can marry that with community production and cooperative economics, we believe that we laid a foundation for a new economy, a transform economy, because it's not just, we need to be clear that it's not just about rebooting the economy. We have to restructure the economy first and foremost, and be very clear about that coming from a social movement perspective. And I include digital fabrication as a part of that social movement and growing consciousness. These are some things that we have to do, I think, to really transform the economy, to make it so that it can actually serve the vast majority of humanity's needs and deal with the crisis kind of head on. It's the nature of how this economy on a global scale, but particularly in the United States, how it's been structured that has produced the outcomes, the disparity outcomes in so many, particularly, I'm just going to name it, Black people suffering and dying in the course of this pandemic. It's just really revealed the system to be as unjust and inequality and equitable as we all know it to be on a more gross level. And this is some of the things that we want to interject in this conversation that we think we need to marry very consciously and intentionally and reach out to form these networks to be able to build the kind of connective tissues that we can then scale up to create a new economy that incorporates all the different elements around UBI, universal health services that Juliet was speaking to. And the last piece, since I'm on this shared screen, I just want to, one of the key things that we were able to do very quickly, and I'll let Sabrina and Kwame, I'm only leaving you about a minute, just to talk about a little bit about the mass production and how we got into that, just real briefly, and then we can go over a little bit more in the 5 minutes we have for questions, perhaps.
Hey, how's everyone doing? My name is Kwame Braxton. Recently, what we've done to kind of help facilitate some of the respiratory issues that we've had here was come up with some 3D printed masks. Most of it's been, I've had to heavily rely on CAD and CAM software to come up with it. One of the unique features about these masks are they're made from PLA, which is a plastic that's used in a lot of medical situations. It comes with a filter, and we've got a filtration devices built inside the mask, so it's completely breathable. The main thing that we're trying to do is kind of facilitate frontline healthcare workers who have had like a shortage in masks, because we, like when the pandemic hit, there was a large shortage in the N95 masks on top of the material within the N95 masks being proven to be kind of dysfunctional to a certain degree. So what me and Sabrina have kind of come up with was some masks that we can kind of facilitate for the shortage. And we've gotten a lot of feedback from it. We've it was a tedious process. We had to come up with at least about 6 or 7 iterations before we got something that we could kind of, you know, really build upon. And it's still a process that we're developing every day. It's, you know, I'm new to the Fab Lab industry, so this is a lot of processing and digestion. But we do plan to kind of keep this process going until, I guess, the end of the pandemic. So that's pretty much it. I don't want to take too much of you guys' time.
So I think we're out of time, Blair. Sabrina, anything you want to just add on, just briefly?
Yes, hello everyone. Also, another very important aspect of this is that we're also located in a space in Jackson where we are surrounded by people who wouldn't even have an option in medical worker or essential workers, mainly essential workers, who wouldn't even have access to technology like this in regard to mask and safety. So we have a really huge opportunity to help shorten the health disparities related to this pandemic in our area as well. And that's all I have right now. Thank you.
All right. So you use the presentation time and the Q&A down to about the second. So we're good. We're going to shift over to Vasilis at this point in time. He's professor of P2P governance, and he's also a faculty associate at Harvard University's Berkman Klein Center. He's a founder of the P2P Lab. In 2019, he was awarded a 4-year grant from the European Research Council to study the convergence of the digital commons with local manufacturing technologies. He's written essays for several outlets such as the Harvard Business Review, and his work has appeared in over 15 languages. And so, no stranger to Fab Network, and as a practitioner and a researcher and a theoretician, look forward to hearing your input on this component. And also remember at the end, we're gonna have a panel discussion, and I'd love to get some collective input around some of the questions that have come in. So if you've been putting questions in the YouTube component, not ignoring them, just some of them would be better for the group at large to respond to.
So thank you, Blair, for your generous introduction. I'm gonna start right away so that I can save some time. Just a minute to share my screen. Yeah. So in a book titled "Why Can We All Just Get Along?", MIT scientists Lieberman and Fry discuss why we have wars, mass poverty, and other social ills. They argue that we cannot cooperate to solve our major problems because our institutions are saturated with a competitive spirit. But Lieberman and Fry have some good news. Modern technology, they believe, can address the root of the problem. They argue that we compete when there is scarcity, and that recent technological advances such as 3D printing and AI will end widespread scarcity. Thus, a post-scarcity world premised on cooperation would emerge. But can we really end scarcity? New technologies come to consumers as finished products that can be exchanged for money. This hides the fact that many of these technologies exist at the expense of other humans and local environments. Hence, the scarcity experienced by some is linked to the abundance enjoyed by a few. Many people also believe that issues of scarcity can be solved by using more efficient technologies. However, this may overlook the impact of efficiency improvements. The Gibbons paradox is a finding attributed to the 19th century economist Stanley Gibbons. The Gibbons paradox illustrates how efficiency improvements can lead to an absolute increase of resource use. For example, the invention of more efficient train engines allowed for cheaper transportation that catalyzed the Industrial Revolution. However, this did not reduce the rate of fossil fuel use. Rather, it increased it. More efficient technologies, we know that from plenty of empirical evidence, use less energy and thus they cost less, which often encourages us to use them more, resulting in a net increase in energy use. So both global energy use and global material use have increased threefold since the 70s. In 2012, a group of scientists predicted what would happen to global resource use if economic growth continued on its current trajectory, and should every nation immediately adopt best practice in efficient resource use. They found that human use of natural resources would rise to 93 billion metric tons by 2050. This is almost double the sustainable level of resource use. And consider that the Gibbons paradox has not been accounted here. So study after study shows that there are physical limits to how efficiently we can use the natural resources. The good news is that there are alternatives. This used to be an alternative to the dominant mode of production almost 3 centuries ago. It is a pin factory from the famous book of Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. In observing a pin factory, Smith saw the foundations of what we nowadays call capitalism. I argue that today we have examples that point to an emerging mode of production. The wide availability of network computers has allowed new community-driven and open source models to emerge. Consider Wikipedia, that has displaced Britannica and Microsoft Encarta, GNU Linux, on which the top 500 supercomputers run, or the Apache web server, which is the leading software in the web server market. Wikipedia, Apache, and GNU Linux demonstrate how non-coercive cooperation around globally shared resources, that is to say, around a commons, can produce artifacts as innovative, if not more, as those produced by industrial capitalism. These are actually the new pin factories of our age. In the same way, the emergence of Fab Labs gives rise to new open source models in manufacturing and design. I shall discuss 2 cases which colleagues and I have been studying and have been actively participating in. Let's see the prosthetics industry. Amputees are often disappointed at the high cost of buying and maintaining their prosthetic devices. This is a design of a prosthetic hand created by a geographically distributed community of scientists, designers, and enthusiasts. All knowledge, software, and designs related to the manufacturing of such a hand are shared around the globe as a digital commons. Therefore, anyone with access to a Fab Lab can customize and build such a hand. We have actually a low-tech hand, a low-tech technology that has been produced using high-tech machinery, 3D printing machinery in particular. Another example, small-scale farmers rarely find appropriate machinery to support their work. So a community in France, L'Atelier Paysan, has designed and manufactured its own agricultural machines. This community shares its designs with the world as a global digital commons. 2 other communities of small-scale farmers, one from the US and another from Greece, have done the same. So these 3 communities have connected and created synergies by improving the same digital commons. Again, here we observe a blending of high-tech and low-tech artifacts. So my team and I are exploring an emerging mode of production that builds on the convergence of digital commons with Fab Labs. This mode of production can be understood as DGML, design global, manufacture local. Put simply, DGML follows the logic that what is light, knowledge, becomes global, and what is heavy, machinery, is local and shared. This allows for the consideration of the limits posed by finite resources and for organizing the production according to participant-defined value systems and business models. Our research project is called cosmolocalism. So cosmolocalism comes partly from cosmopolitanism. Cosmopolitanism asserts that all human beings belong to a single community based on a shared morality and a shared future. Cosmolocalism captures the potentials of the global digital commons in conjunction with the capacity for more localized manufacturing. The shared morality comes through the commons, meaning through co-creating and co-managing shared resources. So far, we have observed 3 interlocked practices of DGML, of designing globally and manufacturing locally, that exhibit positive dynamics for environmental and social sustainability. First, the incentives for design-embedded sustainability. DGML communities arguably design useful products first and foremost to be used by themselves. So there are no incentives for planned obsolescence. Second, the possibilities of on-demand production. Materials tend to travel less as manufacturing is ad hoc and localized. And third, the practices of sharing digital and physical productive infrastructures. Communities not only share code and designs, but also machinery. We are now doing a thorough evaluation of DGML products, of products that have been globally designed and locally manufactured from an ecological economics perspective. We are studying, for example, the degree to which the users of such a product feel in control of the technology and knowledge necessary for its use and manipulation. But I think for the Fab Lab community, two of our preliminary so far conclusions and ideas might be of interest. First, the idea of a mid-tech. Our conclusion so far speaks for a need to creatively synthesize high-tech and low-tech. Considering the negative externalities of high-tech, including fabrication equipment and products, we argue for a mid-tech, that is to say, the golden mean that would synthesize the best parts out of high-tech and low-tech. And second, we are exploring an idea that we call scale-wide versus scale-up, meaning that we need much institutional innovation so that we design the protocols and the institutions for myriads of small, locally oriented, but globally connected initiatives to be able to talk to each other, to share design software and many other things, and in that way to create a global counterpower and thus create the world they want within the confines of the world they want to transcend. Thank you.
Very efficient talk.
Yeah, although I argue against efficiency, but more about effectiveness, yeah, maybe it was a bit of efficient too.
We had a question that came in specifically for you. You know, quote unquote, quality of life has been the centerpiece of a few of the presentations. Is there a universal definition of quality of life that can be used as a basis for a globally applicable solution?
No, I don't think that such a universal definition exists. The thing is that what we are trying to see is that how each community will have access to a pool of knowledge, design, software, whatever, machinery, and it is up to the community to define what is meaningful for this community. And that's why before I talked about participant-defined value systems. This may be a complicated term, but this is what I mean. To enable each community to have not only technologically sovereign, but also to have value sovereignty.
Yeah, it speaks a lot to self-determination and the local definition of, you know, what is important in the process of doing that.
Yeah, in Greek we have a word for that. This is autonomy.
All right. There has been a reoccurring theme in terms of environmental interrelationship with any thought of building back on the economic side. The two are kind of highly related. Reoccurring theme of it needs to work for most people. You know, whether that's just kind of quantitatively, it needs to work for the majority of people, not the few, or it needs to work for people in different contexts and situations, not based upon some arbitrarily defined kind of quality. And also there's been different discussions of, you know, blended and appropriate technology, phrased in different ways, but different types of technology, whether they're social and and mechanistic technologies, or whether they're different levels of technology that are kind of involved. I know in addition to kind of researching and doing general network work, you do local work on this specifically. And in your context, you're kind of in a intersection point of a lot of things going on. As you reminded me the other day, you have ongoing aspects of austerity measures imposed from 2008. You've got climate refugees. You've got a lot of. Can you speak a little bit to how you're beginning to synthesize this in your specific context for the local work?
Yeah, actually, I'm based in Greece, but I'm based on a mountainous city of Greece, where Greece was one of the first states in Europe, actually the very first state in Europe that was very much hit by austerity measures. And in addition to the austerity measures, a few years later, we had a refugee crisis, not only climate refugees, but war refugees from Syria and from many other places in Africa and in Middle East. So my city since then has been a crossroad of austerity measures and refugee crisis. And we saw that this creative synthesis of low tech with high tech is very important when your mission is need driven, meaning that we are researchers, so we get funding from the EU with a mission to do some, most of the times, high tech things, but most often than not, people needs here are solved, are met, are addressed by low-tech artifacts too. So within this context, we came to realize that we should not fetishize high-tech, and we should focus on the needs. We should focus on the local materials. We should focus on the local context, on the local skills, and see together with the local communities how we can make the best out of it. Yeah, so I think my place right now is a very interesting place to be, at least from a Fab Lab phenomenon perspective.
All right, thank you. We can get a little bit of a jump on the next speaker and have a little bit more time at the end for the collective discussion and Q&A. And again, we're going to encourage all of the speakers to inquire of each other at the same time. In addition to, I have a long list of questions, but I'll delay those until you get a chance to kind of explore and unpack. And we have some additional questions kind of coming in. So last but certainly not least, Cindy Kothala studies Fab Labs and material peer-to-peer production through ethnographic inquiry, focusing on the potential for socioeconomic transformation, socio-environmental transformation, excuse me. She examines makers, techno-utopian imaginaries in enacting a new industrial revolution, and how makers self-organize and act to democratize and localize material production. That was a mouthful. So if you could unpack that for us, and very interested in having you explore your topic, so I'll hand it off.
Great, thanks. Everybody can hear me, I guess? Yeah, good. Let me just get 1 second into where I need to be with the slides. And then I will share my screen like that. And there we are. Okay, so yes, what you are seeing on the screen, hopefully, is on the left side, actually, is the cover of my dissertation, which I completed in 2016. If anybody is interested, the PDF is available for free on Aalto University's website. On the right, there's a QR code. A couple of days ago, we started just a Miro board, thanks to Emilio Vélez for setting that up, just so that we could get some ideas, post-it notes in general from the Fab Lab community, what people think when you hear rebooting economies, which might sound like kind of a big scale thing that you might not really know what role you can have in something like a concept of rebooting, restructuring economies. So maybe at the end of my presentation, we can go to the board. I realize it might be difficult if you have only one device to try to switch to the board and watch this at the same time, but let's see what happens. There's a few notes on the board already, and I'm really happy to say that when I looked very quickly, the board is already populated with some of the ideas that have been coming up all the way through this nice presentation. So let's see. So what I'm going to be talking about is, because I do study imaginaries, narratives, visions, utopias, especially socio-technical kind of visions that social movement groups try to co-create and then they try to realize. This is what I studied in my dissertation. This is what I'm looking at now. I do have a design for sustainability background as an educator and as a writer. So that has been, socio-environmental sustainability has been very, very important for me to look at, especially at the beginning of what we now call the maker movement, the digital maker movement. There has been these huge techno-utopias that kind of tend to invisibilize the environmental impacts as well as the social benefits or the barriers to being able to actually enact those social benefits. So some of my colleagues and I in design education have been looking at this concept of distributed economies, which was a notion that was quite popular in around 2005, in the mid 2000s, a concept that came from Lund University in Sweden. They have an Institute for Ecological Economics there. And it's something that we have been hearing all the way along here, that the expectation is that not that we're going to be able to dump mass production and large scale centralized production units, but to find some kind of balance for regional development and at a local scale, that what is actually creating great negative impact socially and environmentally in our communities that we would want to try to mitigate, prevent, to run down, and instead foster other ways, diversity of economic activities, more communication, more value addition to local resources, and so on. At the moment, consumers are very distanced from production. Environmental and social costs are invisibilized. They are externalized in value accounting, and so on. People just don't have control over their economic environment. So a concept of distributed economies was taken up by some academics as something that was quite promising. So flexible small-scale production systems, reinventing quality and prioritizing it before production efficiency. Because often we see a case is that efficiency can come into conflict with community resilience in different kinds of ways. I think I'll just go more quickly through these slides. So we have a forthcoming volume. We just have sent it to the publisher. It will, when it comes out, it will be copyleft and open source PDF shareable. So again, from the design perspective, not necessarily from the policy analyst or wider sociological perspective, but from the design perspective, how could we help local actors to start to interact in ways that we could consider decentralized and distributed for social and environmental benefit. But what is interesting, of course, is that these notions, concepts, utopias about local small-scale production and craft industry are not new. They keep coming up again and again in cycles, and I think that that's something to kind of to keep in mind, that let's not throw away the past either. The reason why distributed economies, small-scale local production is coming up in conversation again is because we need them. But there are dynamics also that, because they are marginal, they are often kind of labeled utopian in the negative form of the word that I don't actually mean. Utopian meaning idealistic, unrealistic. But when I use the word utopian, I'm talking about visions that actually inspire groups, mobilize them. People already involved in those practices kind of contribute to this utopian building, vision creating, and that attracts more people into these practices. So for example, in this study, the disappearance of cooperatives from economics textbooks, Kalmi was looking at how cooperatives were examined in economics textbooks and they kind of disappeared. They were invisibilized. So when neoliberal ideas, austerity, neoclassical economic indicators could become the dominant paradigm, then cooperatives are seen as, okay, not of value, let's kind of run them down, let's make them invisible, and so on. And this can lead to, as it says there, a neglect of the potential of cooperatives in addressing social problems. Now there's a cycle again. We recognize the value of cooperatives and their potential. So we revisit them and we revisit these utopias in order to actually realize them. This also looks at historical alternatives to mass production, and the same idea. There were writers, especially anarchist writers like Proudhon, who were promoting the ideas of small-scale local production and the role of craft industry. And these authors argue that it's not just that these are utopian ideas that we need to reintroduce. They argue that these small-scale industrial practices and craft industries were actually very viable, and they were much more powerful in relation to mass production in economies in historical time than perhaps historical narratives now allow for. Now we get the feeling that mass production came and totally made everything irrelevant. Another anarchist writer, Kevin Carson, has also argued a little bit the same thing, that these smaller scale production types of regional activities were actually very strong in certain regions, that we could look back at them and learn from them. And now, of course, we do have this fantastic opportunity with the spread of digital fabrication tools, ICT, and the cosmo-local sharing that Vasilis was just talking about. What I actually really like about what Kevin has brought up now recently in his forthcoming work is this word of prefigurative, which is also a term that's used in transition studies, sustainability studies, also in some anarchist writing, that what is happening now that we see, for example, with Cooperation Jackson, is that this is prefiguring what we actually want for the future, that we're actually trying to build the lifestyle, the values, the kind of the atmosphere and the utopia that people can kind of get around and get mobilized and excited and inspired by. But what Kevin argues also is what's really important is not just kind of the values or the vision, but it's also the actual institutional structure. It's the infrastructures that Fab Labs, organizations like Cooperation Jackson are now doing, which are interstitial, that these are the actual kind of roots of the infrastructure that we're building now. And Fab Labs have been doing these interstitial activities all the way from the very, very beginning, that introducing digital fabrication technologies to a wider audience in order to kind of convey what meanings digitalization has for society, what infrastructures for localizing production are now being built. These are interstitial activities that we can pay attention to, and we can really foster the ones that have social and environmental potential in a positive sense. So what you see in the photograph here is FABxLive Fab Lab in Oslo. Jens Dyrvik's labs. He's a really well-known Fab Labber. This is actually in the old location. They've now moved to a larger location. But why I bring this up is as a prefigurative and interstitial activity. What Jens and his founding partners did with FABxLive is to start a cooperative. They had an explicit choice of what kind of company organization to make, and they decided on a cooperative for a number of different reasons. And it means that there are certain values that are then made explicit. There's shared responsibility and ownership. And when they report to the city authorities who have given them grants, then they have certain types of indicators that differ from kind of just sheer profit in a venture capitalist model. So this is my favorite example that I have found now in the very recent past, in the last few months, called Disco Co-op. And Disco is for Distributed Cooperative Organization. This is a model that Guerrilla Media Collective has been working on for a number of years. So it's an actual cooperative doing translations that have been practicing new ways to set up their cooperative in ways that are very beneficial for them, but start to enact and prefigure the value structures for this new kind of better economy that they want to contribute to. So they have 4 elements in the DNA of a disco model, which is of course the commons and the P2P element that we have been hearing about already. Especially what's important is open source and commons, especially the open source principles when they come from open source software, have not necessarily addressed the actual interaction between humans, the need for inclusion and justice and so on. So they want to combine open source principles and commons, the idea of the commons, with cooperative principles, social solidarity movements, and so on, especially learning from Latin American social solidarity movements around horizontalidad, autonomia, etc. Open value accounting enables value sovereignty by rewarding meaningful contributions to projects rather than wage labor. And finally, feminist economics. I think this is a thing that has been missing from very, very much of recent discussion. Challenging normative economic abstractions while factoring reproductive and care work. So care work is a strong element in their operating practice. The cooperative has kind of a dashboard for being able to see what work it is that they're doing. Care work would mean care for the infrastructure of the cooperative, but also the well-being of the people that work there. These are the 7 non-prescriptive principles that they then have come up with that are updated from the original cooperative principles that you can read there. For example, centered on care work, prototypes for new flows of values, and so on. So my key takeaways for my presentation would be that these kinds of micro utopias, the concepts of small scale local production and well-being microeconomies keep coming up in cycles again and again when we need them. And I think it's nice to remember that, to learn from the past, and to remember and to try to look for these interstitial activities that are happening now and interconnect them so that we can learn together. I think I will stop my presentation there. And before or while Blair talks to me, I was thinking that I could share the board. How about that?
And if you could, just give a little overview of what the board is about.
Yeah. So let's see, it should come in up. Yeah, so this is the board and I can see all kinds of people there. Yay, thank you. Let's see, there were some, I have put the disco link there already. I can see we have things that I can do, strengthening local fabrication capabilities and logistics. I can see barriers being the techno-solutionism that we have talked about a lot, fascination with over-technologized futures. We need time to build community, but also to network with others in a new type of economy. We need to make care work visible. We need to pay attention of the voices of those without the privilege to be able to access Fab Labs in these kinds of spaces. We talked about I think Blair mentioned the donut economies concept earlier. I can see that we have sizing the donut right, so that we are thinking about the local donut, but even the lab donut, and so on. So thanks for contributing to the board.
And there will be a link to that will be on the page, linked to the event, along with the other items that the speakers have mentioned. So check back to, if you didn't scan the QR code at the beginning of the presentation, for the link to this board and other resources. So there are few. So let's kind of just move directly into the kind of panel and Q&A piece. And I think it would probably be fair to start with questions that have come in. There was a little bit of time lag on some of the questions, and some of them are to the panel at large. And then I would kind of ask you to inquire of each other items that you would like to kind of explore and unpack a little bit more. And then I want to also zero in with some questions on, at this particular instant in time, kind of given, the unique characteristics of, a network which is highly motivated, which is highly skilled, and also equipped to be very agile and to do things, along with this current state of breakdown where it's necessary to reconstruct things in order to get to a state of effective operation, how we would apply some of the things that we've heard in order to give folks the maximum leverage to kind of be impactful. So that's what I want to kind of do at the end. So let me kind of go through the questions that have come up that we haven't addressed yet. One was, how did COVID change the average work hours, given the fact that people were working from home? And I think that was probably addressed to Juliet.
Yeah, well, I don't think we've seen any studies yet. I would say that seems pretty clear it reduced hours of work. You have the combination of people working at home, which of course is more white collar work. And then you've got people in service sector, certain manufacturing and so forth, who lost access to their jobs. So I've been studying gig economy, so ride hail, for example, all those ride hail drivers, they might still have been out there in their cars, but their actual work collapsed. So on average, it's you've had a big reduction in work time. Of course, the stress levels and total work time, if we include unpaid household work, for many people went up because children were kept home from school. So you had, and that's women especially, with many, many more hours of child work. So the intensity of work went up, the multitasking, the total hours, and it's been a very mixed bag, I would say. And a lot of it has to do, the differences are connected to sort of how much economic privilege people have. Whether a paycheck is still coming into their bank account every month, because those folks would be paid monthly, versus somebody who suddenly had to switch from being an Uber driver to now is doing food delivery or grocery shopping, etc. So fewer working hours, but this also raises the difference between hours reductions, which are voluntary, and those which are involuntary. And they're very, very different in terms of how people experience them and the impacts that they have.
I would imagine, part of the constructive model of reduction in work hours is to spread them out. I would guess that hasn't happened very much in this setting. Certain people's work has collapsed completely. Other people have actually kind of gone up, and it hasn't kind of democratized access to work opportunities in any kind of way. I'm not sure if that's correct, but that would be my initial take.
Yeah, mine too. And that's common in recessions. So for example, in the United States anyway, as I said, in Europe, people share out the reduction. Everybody, gets a little bit of a pay reduction. The government kicks in to maintain most of the pay. In Europe, for example, with the shutdown, a lot of the governments just paid the companies money to keep everybody on payroll at 80% of their wages. But typically in a recession, a lot of people get laid off, and then the people who are left have higher work hours because there are fewer people there to do the work. So I think that is probably what we've seen in this period as well.
Mm-hmm. The novel aspect of novel coronavirus as a disease and the novel aspect of its impact on the economy is interesting. We're in the middle of steering, in the middle of very little data, and catching up on kind of what's happening along the way. It'll be very interesting to look back at this in the future to understand it a lot more. But it's also important to seize this opportunity to be impactful while things are in a position to kind of be built back. There was a question on why not improve our city's density to have better local activities, and I think that probably came in during Cooperation Jackson's discussion. That question makes sense, Kali?
Yeah, it makes sense. That is definitely something that we are for, not only in the local context, but I would argue for it globally to a certain extent. It's part of a regenerative program, but to make that effective is going to need a far more robust democratic planning system than what currently exists in almost any place that I can think of. Because if you have kind of the same dynamic of kind of exponential unfettered growth, you're still going to be grossly extracting from the surrounding environments in an unmitigated way. So this is something that would have to be planned on a higher level. And when I say planning, I mean democratic planning, not planning of some of the old school bureaucratic ways in which we've seen and experienced that and know that from other experiments. I think we have to learn both from the good and bad of those experiments and press the issue further. Now, we can tell you from our experience in Jackson that this notion of kind of broader or deeper democratic planning is not without its challenges. And it takes a great deal of resocialization, which I know was part of a question that came up earlier, I think, to get there. And this piece around deepening the development of the social movement so that we create more democratic subjects, I think, is a critical part of anything that has to take place in order for us to, I think, have the possibility of being able to execute a type of planning that could do the urban density and these things. Otherwise, we'll wind up just reproducing the same dynamics on a larger and deeper scale that would just aggravate the inequalities and the exploitation that already exists.
Okay. I thought the question was interestingly phrased because they mentioned improving our city's density. And for some people, that would mean increasing the density to get certain efficiencies. And for other people, that would mean decreasing the density to go more in line with carrying capacity to some extent. So anybody else wish to speak to the idea of improving city's density to have better local activities? Okay.
Just if I can, Blair, I think it's a larger conversation, but I was meaning both. And that's why I went to the piece around who makes those decisions? How are those decisions made? Right? Who determines what improvement is and what the quality of life pieces are that kind of got brought up earlier. We think that we might know, but if we're not engaged in a broad democratic discussion about it, we're going to miss some people's needs. We're going to overlook a number of different things. And then it just winds up being a question of something being imposed from the top as opposed to meeting the needs from below. So that's why there's a democracy piece that has to be embedded in that question, that just to be clear about that, at least from my perspective.
That builds on something Vasilis answered earlier about, is there a universal definition? Right. And so the next question was actually directed to Vasilis also, which is, your project seems to be near to Fab City. Have you tried working together or coordinating efforts?
Actually, my team is one of the founding partners of Fab City. So we are very actively participating in Fab City developments.
And scrolling down through the links. Related to distributed manufacturing, what do you do when the cost of materials is higher than finished goods shipped from China?
Should I address this question or not?
Please. This is open to the group.
Okay.
The question wasn't targeted at anyone in particular.
Okay. May I start just in 2 lines?
Please.
Yeah. So first, it is important to define what we mean by cost of materials. I mean, does this figure internalize negative social and environmental externalities? So why the finished goods in China that are shipped from there cost less? Because of cheap labor, because of the negative environmental externalities that are not counted into the cost. So first, we need new metrics or any new ways of defining what cost actually mean and what this figure actually stands for. And second, I think that a new understanding of what cost is also closely related to what we measure as, what we understand as growth, GDP, etc. You know, all these metrics are very closely connected, and we need actually a new understanding of what is cost, what is understood as human well-being, etc.
And I know that's one of the key items in the whole Fab City process, is defining a set of metrics that represent those things effectively. But at this particular instant in time, people are also very aggressively just doing it from a specific personal marketing point of view.
Yeah.
Making people aware, since people are, have a heightened sensitivity to some of these issues of injustices, making people aware of their supply chain and the attention to upstream and downstream impact and the like that's there. So, you can buy this for a little bit more, apparently, in terms of shelf price. However, it actually is a greater value to you because of this. So.
Exactly. And maybe we need to question even the very idea of metrics. I really don't know whether we need to measure everything. And I don't know whether, reality should be reduced in a simple metric, which actually, create a false image of what is actually detrimental to the environment, to the societies, what is beneficial to them, etc. I think the problem is way more deeper, I think.
May I add on, if that's?
Please.
What I would say, I agree with what he was saying earlier, but I would say possibly, I think this may be kind of tying into what he's saying, but possibly recalibrating the value of what's commodified as resources and base that on that particular demographic's ability to purchase it, as opposed. And basically, what I'm saying is, if I create, say, if I'm a person that grows a plant that can be transferred into PLA or something like that, as opposed to jacking it up to a price that would be most extractive and profitable for myself, why don't I just specifically have a price that's allocated for the regions that I'm distributing it to, as opposed to, I'm only going to sell to this part because they can pay for it, or I'm only going to sell to that part because they can pay for it. Why can't I say, I'll sell them this for that price because that's what they can afford? And, maybe that could possibly help. And then ultimately, establish a system where you can exchange resources for resources, as opposed to resources for, a monetary exchange. May be something that kind of change it, kind of like that. So.
2 other questions have come in. One, does it boil down to 2 dimensions, centralized versus distributed, and cooperative enterprise versus cooperative nonprofit movements?
I take a stab at this one, Blair.
Please.
So those are both really important dimensions of this, but I think it's really key to understand that those are about sort of the structure of market and the structure of the firm. And in a market system, if that's all you have, those 2 dimensions, you're still going to be faced with a number of really important problems. One is you can get race to the bottom effects even when you have cooperative firms. So the firms may be democratically organized, but they're facing the pressures of a market. So their conditions can get degraded and so forth if there's a lot of competition among them. The other thing, we studied the first platform cooperative, which is or the first large one. We did the first academic study, and it's a stock photographers cooperative. And one of the things that we found is what we called sort of the tyranny of the market and these kind of neo-imperialist demands by the consumers. So this is a global platform, but the buyers of the photos wanted white, affluent Westerners in the photos. And the co-op can't really address that. So that's one thing, tyranny of the market. The second, of course, and Cindy's talked about this, I think everyone else on the panel has talked about this, are the environmental dimensions. So a cooperative structure by itself, unless you have internalized those environmental costs, won't solve your environmental problems, because they'll all have individual incentives not to pay environmental costs. So you also have to have meso and macro level, just to use jargon, but sort of mid and sort of total all system level policies in place. So you can't just boil it down to those two things, I would say.
Any other comment on that? We have another couple questions. Okay, the next question, the issue we keep coming up against is how to create a functioning business that works now in the current system that helps us move towards the one that we want, which is a true statement. There was no question in it, so forgive me for that. And there's another comment. So we're forced to use grants and also volunteerism to close the gaps between cost and even the non-extractive price. I imagine there may be some comments on that.
As a comments as a question, or just a reflection or back on it?
Just a reflection on the reality or non-reality of that comment.
I think I will speak for our experience. I think it's a transitional reality. It definitely for us, we've very consciously and intentionally tried to use what we say. We try to transform philanthropic capital into productive capital. That's an ongoing piece of kind of our development model, as I was speaking to earlier. Even though it's not the old school of building a factory, it's still, for the most part, our membership would not have been able to, do our community production cooperative if it wasn't for support from some external sources in the form of grants, but also other types of investment. But our ability, I think, as we've demonstrated, just within this last 6 or 7 months on a higher level, is our ability now with the skill that we've acquired and just the basic level of equipment we have to this point, being able to make a pivotal transition to be able to produce both for the market, but also, more importantly, I would argue in the long term, being able to produce at cost for need and the need in the community. And I think ultimately from our perspective, we want to be able to create a distributed, productive network and associated producers so that we can produce at cost and we can produce for human need. And I think as these systems get developed, wherein that there's all the basic infrastructure needs and fundamental kind of essential needs around healthcare, childcare that are being socially met, that we can reduce our need to rely upon the market in this kind of external way, which is extractive more than a distributive. That is where I think we can head. But I think we need to be very clear about our strategies on using kind of grants and all these particular things, because they don't, we all know that some of those come with very tight strings. And how do we get out of those strings? How do we negotiate those things? I think it's something we have to do on the front end, but that piece of transforming that and having a plan to be able to make it more productive capacity is a critical thing that we have to think through, I think, at this stage in the game.
Okay. Panelist to panelist, did you have any follow-on that you wanted to discuss for the benefit of the folks who are kind of tuned in? Seemed to be a lot of violent agreement during the course of the talks, but go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, and I had a question for the folks from Corporation Jackson, and just sort of on balance, would you say that the pandemic has proven to be I mean, it sounds like this is the case. I guess I would just like to hear if I'm interpreting properly. The pandemic has proven to be a sort of accelerator for your activities, interest, and so forth, an opportunity more than a threat. Of course, there are also, I'm sure, really important ways in which it's a threat. I'd kind of be curious about how you, just very specifically on that.
It's worked in both ways. I don't know if you want to touch on this, Kwame. It's worked both ways.
Just to give you a bit of background, this will be my second year in the Fab Lab, and this has definitely been this I would definitely say has been a catalyst for as far as what I'm trying to create, and not just me personally, but just everything that I can consume. I've had a lot of different things, like Blair told me this saying. He says there's a water hose of information out here, and I've definitely been getting drunk off the water hose of information. So yeah, it's been a serious catalyst for innovation here, and it's not. It's a challenging one, but it's also more of a I guess the inner child in me sees this as a very invigorating experience, but it is very serious at the same time. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, definitely has, from my perspective. Yeah.
One thing I will add, Julie and everybody, is our motto was very much premised around learnings from Hurricane Katrina. So there's a certain level of preparedness that the Corporation Jackson was articulated to try to adjust to. And I think the proof is now in the pudding that we were flexible and nimble enough, particularly with the addition of the Fab Lab, to be able to meet some of the PPE needs. But that form was just one form. We've also had kind of an old school low tech form. We've been producing cloth masks, right? So we've been able to do that for our mass all production, to realize both a kind of a mass free giveaway, but one that's also focused. So it's been a catalyst, I think, for us, but I don't want to give people the impression that some of these dynamics are new. Some of this was built in our analysis around how crises are going to become more recurrent as a system that we know and we've lived in is continuing to collapse around us. And what are the things that we need to do to be prepared? So I think we had that kind of going in, and it's helped us to make this pivotal adjustment this last 4 or 5 months.
Thanks.
Okay, I've been reminded to do a little housekeeping. Let me get that out of the way, and then I can ask a couple questions out until they cut me off. So from the housekeeping perspective, everyone, please keep in mind, don't leave after the short bio break, because we'll be back with Fabercise and the Fab World. And then also remember, in the afternoon, there will be several kind of breakout sessions, if you will, on Zoom. And one of those, I think I mentioned earlier, in terms of inclusion, I think will be a useful one that will leverage off of some of the concepts that I kind of talked about here. So are there any closing kind of observations? Again, we've got a couple of folks are mentioning they got about 2 hours worth of questions that we could kind of work with here. But why don't you go ahead, Kali? If you have one, we got about 1 minute and 15 seconds.
For a question or just a closing comment?
If you had a question, there'd be a good opportunity to do that. Otherwise, closing comments fine.
I guess just because it mirrors the most, just kind of with Vasilis, just how to phrase the question real quickly, like the crisis adjustment that you guys are still going through as a result of the austerity. how has that been magnified by the pandemic in Greece? And like, what role is kind of the productive aspect that you were talking about? What role is that playing to kind of mitigate and create some more resiliency in Greece right now?
28 seconds.
Okay, so thank you for the question, Kari. The pandemic has obviously made things much worse. But at the same time, Greece, I think, has proved herself to be resilient because of the commons. I mean, especially the place where I live, I don't live in Athens. Athens is a different story. I live in the countryside, and in the countryside, we are what I consider our economy is not like a capitalist economy, but as a pre-capitalist economy, meaning that we have a lot of elements from older times that are commons based. We have a strong social net, but not a social net that has been supported by the state, but a social net that has been supported by the local society, the local communities. And I think that the local commons have played a pivotal role, an instrumental role in resiliency here in Greece. This is my very short question to a very interesting and complicated question.
So I look forward to actually developing some mechanisms to continue this conversation offline. So I will out of this context. So we'll loop back into that and hopefully provide a link. So I think that's a hard stop. And again, continue to stay tuned. Biobreak, Fabercise, and then additional activities afterwards. We're signing off.
Welcome back to our Fab Symposium. Now, after our amazing talk with Rebooting Economies, we have our Fabercise for today. So everyone should get up, get going, and we have our Fabercise with Beno, Juarez, and Fab Lat.
Go.
Well, hello and welcome back after that exhausting Fabercise hosted by Beno and the lab team. And to continue with our programs today, we are gonna continue with our pitches. On Monday, we had an incredible session of pitches between Armenian and the Czech Republic. And today we're going to continue with Panama and Finland. But remember, we are going to make a poll on our Mighty platform. That is part of the final decision, but that's not the final decision. We need to understand that in order to be selected as host of the next Fab event, there's a couple of criteria that you need to fit, especially related to the combination of location, the network strength, the capabilities that you have there. So take that into consideration once you do your actual voting on the poll that we have on the Mighty, but it's starting the conversation there. So without further ado, I will leave you with the pitches from Panama and Finland.
Hi, my name is Vasilis Kostakis, Minister of Tourism of Panama. Dear Fab Academy members, I am pleased to be supporting the candidature of Panama as host for the Fab 2024. Panama is a world-class and sustainable destination thanks to the extraordinary richness and diversity of both its natural and cultural heritage and the quality of its services. Panama will offer you a wide range of services, top-of-the-line modern infrastructure, tourist attractions, specialized logistics, and an excellent connectivity you can reach anywhere in the world, with air frequencies of more than 1,500 weekly direct flights departing from North, South America, and Europe to the hub of the Americas. It is important to mention that Panama is characterized by its hospitality and for being a place where diverse cultures from around the world have perceived our human qualities to the point of considering it a second home. Rest assured that if chosen as a host, Panama will offer Fab Academy our best services and facilities for the 2024 World Assembly. We hope to see you all soon, and stay safe.
and we want you to come to Oulu.
Come to Oulu.
And I think you should come to Oulu.
Come check it out. Love Finland.
Come to Oulu.
Come to Oulu and let's talk in the sauna.
Amazing videos from Panama and Finland. Don't forget that you can poll and tell us what you think on our platform, fabxmembers.fabevent.org. And now we have our really exciting Fab World. So we have a selection of videos from all across the network about projects that they've been doing, about COVID activities, about new labs, and we invite you to lay back and enjoy the following videos from our entire network.
Bueno, lo del Fab Lab móvil tiene casi 2 años. Es un proyecto que ya casi tenemos 2 años de estar negociando con Colby, trabajando con ellos para ver cómo podemos hacerlo realidad.
Bueno, yo tuve contacto con Diana desde el área de innovación y yo conocí el trabajo de ella conoció el trabajo que yo hacía, como 2 empresas muy fuertes, públicas, 2 empresas del gobierno. Como se nos encendió la luz y dijimos, bueno, entrémosle a esto.
A nivel de país, nosotros sí queríamos buscar una opción que nos permitiera acceder más fácilmente a poblaciones que no conocen de estas tecnologías y que difícilmente pueden trasladarse aquí al gran área metropolitana para conocerlas.
Nos aprobaron el sacar de la subasta un camión de estos y adaptarlo y que pudieran trabajar el laboratorio directamente.
Algo nuevo que tuvimos que aprender a hacer fue modificar un camión de la manera interna, un proceso muy cansado, muy largo, porque hubo desde que despegar todo lo que ya tenía, lijarlo, pintarlo, para ya una vez que estuviera de esa manera estética aceptable, empezar a hacer la remodelación.
La idea es tener una opción que nos permita democratizar el acceso de esas personas al conocimiento de estas tecnologías y sobre todo a las posibilidades que podrían brindarles para lo que ellos hacen en su vida personal, profesional, emprendimientos o procesos de aprendizaje.
Ya podemos mostrar un camión que tenga los distintos equipos, impresoras 3D, cortadoras láser, mostrar las distintas tecnologías que tenemos a tanto población que tenga fácil acceso, porque no es cerrado, sino que también a población que tenga difícil acceso a estas tecnologías.
Es una iniciativa que tiene un elemento de innovación social muy fuerte, porque el foco no es lucrar, invitamos más bien a que sea un espacio para que cualquiera nos pueda visitar y pueda crear.
Y pues honestamente me genera mucha satisfacción porque fue un proyecto que lo vimos desde el inicio, desde las paredes como estaban y los pisos como estaban, y ya verle esa transformación que tuvo fue un cambio muy satisfactorio, para ser honesto.
Muchas veces solo consumimos lo que existe y muchas veces también tenemos ideas de cómo eso se podría mejorar. La posibilidad de que la gente entienda que este tipo de tecnologías le facilitan eso, ¿verdad? No son limitantes sino más bien son elementos que puede utilizar para facilitarle esos procesos y para crear y para construir cosas, para equivocarse y para volver a empezar. Eso es lo que nosotros creemos que le facilitaría a la gente crear más y ser más disruptiva, digamos, en los entornos en los que están, no siempre aceptar las soluciones que se le están dando como las únicas, sino más bien ser más propositivo y considerar que él mismo podría cambiar las situaciones que no son tan favorables para él o para los que le rodean.
Witamy w Fab Labie w Bielsku-Białej, w miejscu, które nie wszyscy może znacie, które nie wszystkim się może kojarzyć z tym, co się tutaj w tym miejscu odbywa. Jest to miejsce o wysokim potencjale innowacyjnym, wyposażone w różnego rodzaju sprzęt i materiały pozwalające przekuć wszystkie rodzące nam się w głowie idee w rzeczywistość fizyczną w postaci obiektów, elementów wydrukowanych lub wyciętych na drukarce laserowej, elementów wyciętych na ploterach, elementów, które mogą tworzyć jedną wspólną całość w postaci nowego, innowacyjnego projektu. Udało nam się to zrobić dzięki wykorzystaniu środków z funduszy unijnych, z programu dla Europy Centralnej w ramach projektu FABLab.net. Udało nam się przeprowadzić szkolenia dla uczniów szkół średnich, szkół podstawowych. Przybliżamy im technologię modelowania przestrzennego, przybliżamy im technologię produkowania różnego rodzaju wyrobów, przybliżamy im możliwości kreowania praktycznie dowolnego produktu.
Hello, Dumbo. How are you doing today? Is it right to say you feel alone? Just like stuck in a box? How can I help you? Oh, I see. You want to meet new friends. Wait, what? You want to build new friends? You have a blueprint? Okay, you have some cardboard? Great. You just need a laser cutter. Well, I'm sorry to say that we are just starting at Fab Lab 4D. And we don't have a laser cutter yet. You want me to build one? Seriously? Well, challenge accepted. I'm Philippe from Fab Lab 4D. We are located in Quebec City, Canada. And here is our laser cutter. This is our machine. An aluminum frame made out of profiles. You can see the computer, a control panel, and obviously an emergency stop button. On the left side, hidden, there's a chiller, which is an expensive fridge. And on the right side, you can see the air exhaust with an inline fan, conduit, and a van cap to outside. If you want to know more on how we build our laser cutter with a limited budget, please join the MTMT group. You are just one click away. And here is Danbo's new friend. Have a nice day, guys, and see you soon on the MTMT group.
Wow. So as we can see from our network, we have an amazing assortment of people doing incredible things everywhere around the world. And as the last video said, we can do it and the challenge is accepted. So with that, we wanted to transition to our COVID-19 Innovation Award. Given that we have all of these incredible people doing work everywhere, we wanted to highlight work that's happening with COVID-19 response, with people doing things across the board, from swabs to helping your local community in the hospital to helping children. There's such a wide range. And so we had this idea of celebrating the network with the COVID-19 Innovation Award. And we partnered with Fab Care and with Dassault Systems SolidWorks and 3D Experience Lab on this super exciting award for everyone. So we get the chance now to announce this award. And to kick it off, we're going to have Abhishek Bali, who manages the 3D Experience Lab program in North America. Abhishek, welcome.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you so much for your generous introduction. Yeah, so I manage the 3D Experience Lab, and you can see behind me this lab in action. We have students of Fab Academy, trying to finish off their assignments right now. But let me begin by telling you a few things that we observed. Rebecca, can you move to the next slide? Right, so in March, mid of March, we started this community called Open COVID-19 community on the 3D Experience platform. And this was like an eye-opener for us because we just had started this community and we were hoping that a few makers would come there and they would share their experience, because all across the world, you'll see that makers either use SolidWorks or XDesign or CATIA to make stuff, and they love to collaborate and share across different platforms, which is great. So when we opened this community, we were really surprised that makers, startups, engineers, designers, experts, they all came together, and within a few weeks we had 400 members who were really, really active, and they were posting what they were learning. And simultaneously we were invited to be part of Neil's group, and we connected with our Simulia experts who are like from Dassault Systems, who helped some of the projects in that tight closed work group with simulations that you might have seen on the first day, Jonathan Gilson and his team. So it was an eye opener for us. So when we started working with Sherry and her team, Rebecca, Norella, around FABx, then we thought we should definitely celebrate this. Rebecca, can you move to the next slide? Right. So you might have seen that, over the past 2 days and, next 2 days, we have brought a lot of things, a lot of workshops, a lot of sessions to the FABx, starting with Magic Wheelchair, which is about, designing epic costumes for children in wheelchair, to LN4 prosthetics. Yesterday, we had this session around how to design your own ventilator to for post-COVID world. Um, we had Open R2, one of our startups or collaborative projects in the lab. They were there, giving a workshop. Today we have 3D Experience works for startups, for all the startups that are starting in the in the Fab Lab network. And tomorrow we are bringing Inali prosthetics and also SolidWorks apps for kids. So if you have missed any of these workshops or sessions, I would definitely request you to look at and watch the reruns of these, and that'll be great. Next. Yeah, and finally, coming to the FABxLive challenge. Well, again, the inspiration was around the these small acts of selfless making that sprung up all across the world. There were labs in India that were closing themselves. They were just making all these face shields for those unknown faces that they could finally help out with. So this really inspired us to do something to celebrate their effort across the world. And anyways, every year we have these scholarships that we give out for Fab Academy and Fab Academy courses. So we thought, why don't we combine these and give scholarships to winners of three categories. And the categories were innovative design solutions or impactful community initiatives, and the third one was solutions for the new normal. So this was our thought process, and I would like to introduce Marie Blanchard, who's one of my dearest colleagues, and she's a senior director of SolidWorks Education, and also a Fab Foundation board member, to give you more facts about the competition. Marie?
I am really excited. Okay, are we good? Okay, thank you, Abhishek. I am really excited to be able to talk about this challenge and the number of entries. We had over 50 entries submitted. We had an amazing panel of judges. Do we have the judges slide? From France, from Germany, from Italy, from the United States. And it was great to see these submissions from over 30 countries. I don't know how the judges decided. And after reviewing the videos, the descriptions, the entries from such dedicated fabbers, such dedicated professionals, Rebecca, I got to turn it back over to you to announce the winners.
Thank you so much, Marie. And I just wanted to mention, if we can go to the next slide, you guys can see here a picture of all of the judges who participated with us, who were from all over the world, as Marie mentioned, and just incredible, incredible group that we worked with. So thank you to all of our judges in the selection committee. So for our winners, so the first winner that we're going to announce is the Innovative Design Solution. And we can go to the next slide. And our winner for this is Maite Sosa Mittal and Fab Lab Montevideo in Uruguay. So we are super excited for this group. Fab Lab in Montevideo is part of the School of Architecture, Design, and Urbanism of the University of La República in Uruguay. They had an impressive collaboration with multiple departments at their university, which we all know can be difficult sometimes, and they really came together. And they came together with the science, engineering, and design departments and implemented the design and development of a 3D printed swab for both nasal and mouth swab testing. And this was validated and authorized for use by the Ministry of Public Health in Uruguay. And during just 1 month, more than 100 versions of this swab heads were made, and a small scale production of 60,000 units, so not so small, was carried out by the Fab Lab to evaluate the possibility of national scale production. So we're super excited for this lab. And our next winner is the winner for the new normal. And so this winner for the solution for the new normal is Mayra Asensio and Fab Lab Peru. So everyone give a clap for them. This is an organization and platform called DigiWasi. So the DigiWasi is an online lab of learning that everyone can go to for young learners. It started in Peru, but they work with learners all over the world, and it helps students find a really fun and engaging way to learn remotely, which we know all students around the world are going to have to do now. And it gives students a chance to collaborate, increase cognitive and emotional well-being, and help kids feel ownership while also discovering these fun ways to learn engineering, learn robotics, learn programming, digital design, and everything you can think of. So this project is evolving, it's constantly growing. All of your students around the world can join. And as Maida pointed out in her submission, to create a better world, we really need empathetic, kind, and sensible citizens, and it all starts from our upbringing, from our childhood. So congratulations, DigiWasi. And our final winner for the impactful community effort is Delia Milan and Fab Lab Cuenca in Spain. So Fab Lab Cuenca and the Spanish community had a very, very hard start with coronavirus, but the maker community really came together quickly and efficiently through a coronavirus makers joint effort. And they were one of the main coordinators. They helped hospitals and multiple sectors of public servants in their local region to have PPE for their community. And they really were the link between the maker community, multiple public and private institutions like the Ministry of Education and the Red Cross. And they really set up production for these incredible collaboration. And they've also started to develop their project further already with their local community, seeing that their rural region really needed help with their teachers. So they've started a new program designed for teachers called Learning by Making in the Classroom, How to Use 3D Printing Against COVID-19. So these are our three winners. We want to congratulate everyone who submitted for this award. We can't tell you how amazing these submissions were. The judges and all of us just didn't know what to do. There were so many to choose from, but we're really excited for our winners. And for those who did not win but submitted, we do have another opportunity for you. If you want to participate throughout FABxLive, there is a Makeathon Makers for Good challenge happening called Fab Labs Designing the New Reality. And you can check that out on our platform, fabxmembers.fabevent.org. And this is another opportunity for you to really highlight the work that you've been doing. So with that, we're gonna go to announcements, but we just wanted to give a big, big thank you to everyone and thank Marie and thank Abhishek and everyone involved in doing this award. And we really look forward to future projects. And now we're gonna change over to our general announcements. So we have a few announcements, as you guys know, before we get into our workshops, before we get into the rest of our day and kick off the rest of our sessions. So first of all, just as a general thank you and shout out, we wanted to thank our Fab team and our Fab Foundation team for organizing and leading our workshops along with our volunteers. We have our workshop leaders, We have our volunteers from FABxLive who are helping with our hosting of our Zoom rooms. And we also have our Fab Foundation staff that are helping to be that extra support and wonderful guidance for us. And we also wanted to give a shout out to the incredible education track that we've been making and to our team that has put together this incredible track of education programs. So thank you to all of our team. It would not happen without all of us. Second, I wanted to point out, as everyone knows, or hopefully know, we have workshops after this in Zoom rooms, and all of the information of all of the workshops you can sign up for are on the Fab event platform. And that's, again, the fabxmembers.fabevent.org. And you can see on the screen now all of these workshops that are happening today. And there's a wide range, so please check them out and see which ones you would like to join after this. We also have still our exciting social distance challenge. So as you guys know from previous days, we have this challenge to really think, explore, create, have fun, do something new, something that's gonna get you to really have some social distance in this time when we need to find a way to stay close with our community and also be safe. And so we want you to keep thinking, keep exploring, and that you can still apply in the challenges topic on our Fab event platform with your submission. And on Friday, we will announce the winners who will receive Brother machines. So please remember to keep thinking, keep creating on what that's going to look like. We're starting to make a surprise challenge with a big hat, so we'll see how that goes. And I wanted to also mention to all of you, along with the social distance challenge and these opportunities to share across your platforms what we're doing, what you're participating in, we do have a media kit on our website, on our FABxLive website, that you can go to and you can download fun virtual backgrounds, which have our FABxLive in the background. You can download things for social media. You can download our sponsors. You can download any fun graphics that we have an incredible team, and shout out to Miriam for doing this incredible graphics, who took Fab Academy and does some wonderful images. So we just wanted to point that out to you. Check out the virtual backgrounds, promote on your social media that you want others to join in with us. And so to close out today, we have right after this at 12 o'clock Eastern time, our sponsor session. So we have 3 sessions today. We have a brother introduction. We have a discussion with Ellie Bueller from the NOLA Fab Lab of what they've been doing with PPE. And we have our 3D Experience Works for Startup session. So those are right after this, and you can also sign up for those on our website and on our FABxLive platform. And we wanted to just remind you that, as you can see, this takes a lot of manpower, a lot of people, and our sponsors and everyone involved are really working hard. And we encourage you, if you can, to donate $1, $10, $20, euros, whatever, wherever you are in the world, to make any type of contribution to help us help the network continue with these incredible projects. So thank you to everyone who already has donated and to everyone who is participating with us. And we cannot wait to see you later today in our workshops. Don't forget to sign up for the workshops for today. And lastly, tomorrow morning, we have our Emergent Futures. So our Emergent Futures Symposium is going to be at 8 a.m. Eastern time, which means it's an hour earlier than we've been doing it the last couple of days. So if you want to tune in, it's going to be super interesting, really engaging. Tomas Diaz in Fab Lab Barcelona was the moderator and gathered this incredible group of people. So please help us by supporting them in our Emergent Future Symposium right here on YouTube, on our Fab Foundation YouTube. And with that, we will close and have an amazing rest of the day.